Please give me 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Meanwhile, we hope you have received, most of you, I know some of you registered only yesterday, so you may not have received the document that we shared yesterday, which compiles the main issues that we have identified from the field testing results. So obviously we did not expect you to review the document in detail before today's meeting. However, this is a good reference for all of you to have a look at, and then please, in the message, you were also invited to join the Spark Blue space that we have created for this task team, where all of you will be able to comment on, share views and suggestions in relation to the points that are raised in the document. So we very much encourage you to join the space and to share your thoughts and your recommendations. I think we finally have our co-chair with us. Arturo, are you with us?
Good morning.
Yes, good morning.
Yes, good morning. I'm Mariana. I'm going to speak in behalf of Mr. Arturo.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you very much,
Thank you
Mariana.
very much, Mariana. Okay, don't worry. So I start?
Yes, please.
Okay. Dear members of the Praia Group Task Team on Non-Discrimination and Equality, warm greetings from INEI Peru, co-chair of this task team alongside Statistics Finland. We have come a long way together. Today, we gather to present and discuss the results of the field testing of the survey model on discrimination, an initiative this task team began developing in early 2022, nearly 3.5 years ago. You may recall how we started. We developing a conceptual and measurement framework, identifying which areas were best measured through a survey and which through administrative data. We then invited you to share existing questionnaires. We mapped survey questions against our measurement areas, and we drew on your experiences to identify the questions and approaches that worked best in this field. We then conducted several rounds of cognitive testing, which significantly improved the questionnaire. Thanks to the dedication of 8 NSOs across all regions. Last year, 9 NSOs went further, volunteering to field test the revised version. some as part of broader national service, other as stand-alone pilots on smaller samples. On behalf of this task team, I want to take this opportunity to express our heartfelt thanks to all participating NSOs. Your time, resources, and personal commitment have been instrumental to this process. Peru was among the NSOs invited in both the cognitive test and the field test. So I can personally attest to the immense effort that went into this work. On the 21st of May, representatives from the 9 piloting NSOs will meet in Oslo with support from Statistics Norway, the MO Abraham Foundation, and UNDP to conduct an in-depth review of the field testing results and discuss necessary revisions to the model. Before we convene in Oslo, it is essential that we share field testing results with the entire task team and take note of your observations and recommendations. The collective expertise within this task team is tremendous. Together, we must ensure that the final instrument is practical for NSOs around the world and that it generates meaningful statistics to combat discrimination and inequality. I am also very pleased that later today, we will also hear updates on the use of administrative data to produce statistics on non-discrimination and equality, another key product of this task team. I look forward to our discussion and thank you in advance for your thoughtful contributions. I will now give the floor to Marie Laverne from UNDP, who will moderate the session.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ariana, and many thanks to Arturo for leading this process together with Statistics Finland. We can move to the next slide. We have a very packed program today. As mentioned by Ariana, we will cover both the results from the field testing and we'll have a short discussion at the end on the administrative data guidance that is also being developed by this task team. So without further ado, I wanted to start by putting on one slide visually the tremendous efforts that have been made by 16 NSOs around the world, in addition, of course, to all of your contributions throughout the process. But these 16 NSOs have either cognitive tested or field tested more recently the different versions of the questionnaire. And you see in the blue those countries in 2024, 2025 that have tested the questionnaire on small samples of more or less 300 respondents. And they ensured in every country that both rural and urban populations were surveyed, as well as a good variety in terms of socio-demographic groups. And then we have 4 countries, and it's probably worth naming them right away: Belize, Israel, Lesotho, and Uganda, who went to scale right away. That is, they integrated the core questions into a national survey that they had already planned to conduct in their country, and therefore generated nationally representative statistics on these topics, which is quite extraordinary. So we will hear more from all of those or many of those NSOs later. Here you see, oh, Fatma, okay, you can move on to the next slide. Where you see just a quick reminder of the content of this questionnaire. And I tried to put it sequentially. So we start, of course, with a quite substantial socio-demographic section. We move on to a first section, which has one core question on the perceptions of discrimination. And then we have an optional, so the light shade orange is signals that it's an optional section, and the darker shade means that it's a core question or a core section. And so we have some optional questions about people's awareness of the legal framework of the institutions that have a mandate to combat or discrimination. And then we move on to a core section, which is really the main part of the survey on personal experiences of discrimination and harassment, which is very much aligned with our SDG indicator 16B1 on experiences of discrimination, and which looks at the areas of life where this happens, whether or not people report the incidents, to whom do they report, if they don't report, why, and then their satisfaction level with the way that the complaint is handled, the impact that these incidents have on their lives. And then we offer two, as you can see, two optional additional sections. One that more or less replicate the same type of questions, but for harassment related to prohibited grounds. And a second one, again, following the same structure, but this time focusing on personal experiences of physical violence related to prohibited grounds. And as you may expect, the number of cases that we are able to capture on these two other topics are a little bit less than the number of cases that we can capture in the section on discrimination. And then we end with a section that has some attitudinal questions. So where we aim to measure attitudes towards minority groups and towards gender equality. So altogether, the core module has 8 questions, and that's very much because of our concern with making this a very practical module that can be implemented cost efficiently and easily and regularly. And in terms of the entire questionnaire, we have just about 25 questions. Next slide, please. So to start us with, we would like to invite 3 NSOs, 3 colleagues from NSOs that have either tested the questionnaire on a small sample or in the case of Israel and Belize, nationwide. And we will start with Israel, who will share with us some of the key key achievements, and other countries will discuss about some of the challenges that they face. And I think this will give you a good flavor of the experience they had and the sort of takeaways that they would like to share with you. So let's start with Israel, who Yafit will tell us about the very high priority given to this topic in the Israeli NSO, as well as how much they were able to contextualize the questionnaire to their own specificities. And that's really something that was very important to this task team, that we would be able to harmonize across countries, but also give a chance to countries to contextualize. So please, Yafit, tell us a little bit about that.
Hi, how many minutes I have?
Yeah,
5 minutes?
3 minutes, yeah.
3 minutes. Okay. Hello to all. My name is Efit Alfandari from the Central Bureau of Statistics in Israel. And with me is Tzila Sadeh from the Social and Gender Economics Department Statistics in Israel. Our department is new and was established in 2022 in light of the change of placing the issue of gender diversity and inclusion at the center of the public discourse in the world. And it became a priority also in Israel. We decided, applying the call from Praia Group to join the non-discrimination survey last year. And I tried to describe you by this slide all our process. Marie asked me to speak about key achievements. The first achievement that I see in front of my eyes is the engagement and the collaboration with the other ministerial governmental ministries. We needed to raise the collaboration with other stakeholders and convince them the necessity of this data. And we got a lot of support from the offices. We applied to the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Social Equality. They are responsible for LGBTQ population and the Arab population. And we applied and they get the support of the Authority for Advancement of Women and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission within the economics ministry. Also, we got the support of the national statisticians. Our department is directly supervised by the national statistician. We also we had to do some adjustments to the survey questionnaire to the local language and also to the local culture. In Israel, we have more than 20% of high religious population. And so we did some adjustments. And also we wanted to highlight the issue of attitudes about working with other people not like you. And we added also places of discrimination, like holy places because of the religious population, and also a place like the army, because the army is a compulsory service in Israel, and it is a very big issue in here. We conducted, I don't have many time, we conducted a cognitive test and also pre-test in Israel, and we saw that the collaboration of the people is very low. So we added a gift card to those who participate in the survey, and we did a survey via mobile phone with no interviewer to immediate the survey. Unfortunately, we received a very low response rate, but now we are working on analyze the data. The data we receive is very high quality. Also, we have only 12% response rate. The quality of the data is good, and we want to publish the findings until July. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Efit. I'm not sure if you mentioned that this was an online survey.
Yes,
right?
yes, speak a
Yeah.
little bit. Yes, online survey by phones.
By mobile
Or
phone,
by
right?
computers. Yeah.
Yeah, which explains the 12% response rate. But no, this is very interesting, and the very high level of attention given to this topic also. You mentioned that you were expecting a lot of attention to be paid to the results when you publish them
Yes.
in a few weeks. So yeah, a story to be followed. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We will now, thanks again. We will now invite our colleague from Belize, Arunel, to talk to us a little bit about the advantages that you've seen in integrating the module in a labor force survey. And then you will tell us a bit about your challenges with interviewing youth, which was a recommendation of this task team that we should include youth in the sample. And finally, considerations that we should have with respect to the timing of conducting this survey. So Arunel, please.
Good morning, all, and thank you, Marie, for that introduction. So yes, our labor force survey, our last round of the labor force survey, was conducted in September of 2024, in which we included the 8 core questions of the discrimination module. And it was important that we included those questions in that round of the survey, given that we also include questions that measure multidimensional poverty. And this would lend to being able to cross-analyze these variables. For example, one question we could look at would be, are households discriminated based on socioeconomic status, which is a ground, because of the majority of adults living in the household are unemployed? So unemployment is an indicator for measuring multidimensional poverty. So it'll be important for us to look at a question like that. And that is just one example that we can use to further analyze multidimensional poverty and discrimination in Belize. Now, in terms of cost saving measures, given that the piloting the discrimination module would be a self-funded endeavor, it was best that we incorporated that module into our September round of the labor force survey, given that a budget was already procured for that survey. Please note that for the labor force survey, we normally sample 3,000 households across the country. That includes all districts in the country. And we sample 120 clusters in total, giving us a nationally representative sample. In terms of parental interference when surveying the youth, we noted that during the field work, that interviewers were reporting that there are some parents who insisted on staying beside their children, persons who are under 18 years old, when the questions were being asked. Please note that in Belize, discrimination is not necessarily a topic that is often discussed, either in the home or in the school or in public or even in workspaces. But we are making steps in strengthening and enforcing laws and policies on discrimination and also conducting educational campaigns. But we have a very long way to go, right? Given that this is why some parents were quite hesitant to allow interviewers to be alone with their child under 18-year-old, asking these very sensitive questions, right? And we believe that because the parents were present, that this may have affected the quality of the data for the youth population in particular. Also, please note that during training, we had instructed the interviewers to gain the consent from a parent or a guardian in order to move forward or to continue with the discrimination questions for persons ages 15 to 17. Though most parents gave consent for the interviewer to ask the questions to their child, some parents, like I said, still insisted on staying beside their child, which we believe led to some of the youth population responding to the questions based on what they believe their parents perceive as discrimination or what their parents experience in terms of being discriminated against. But during training, we also stress that the interviewers are to reassure or to remind the respondent that we are focusing solely on what they perceive as discrimination or what they experience for themselves, right? So that's something important to keep in mind. We had constantly stressed with our interviewers that they need to make sure that the child understood that we just are focusing on what they experience and what they perceive as discrimination. In terms of the timing of the survey and the effects on the results, so like I said, we had conducted the labor force survey last year, September, and then we had our general election take place in March of this year, which is not too far apart. And political tensions are pretty high during that time leading up to the elections. And we believe that that timing played a role in the high rate of reporting discrimination based on political opinion. Now, it would be best not to incorporate the discrimination module in any survey prior or during an electoral year. For example, our next municipal election is scheduled to take part in 2027, so that's not really an ideal year to ask questions on discrimination. And then our next general elections is scheduled to take part in either 2029 or 2030, but that depends on what the ruling party decides to hold elections. But in essence, it would be best not to ask questions on discrimination prior or during an electoral year because this might skew the data. And that's it for my presentation.
Yeah.
And thank you for allowing
Thanks.
me to speak here.
Thanks very much, Arunal. I will now, we are pressed with time, so let's go straight to Cabo Verde. Eduardo, please, if you will tell us a little bit about the interviewer training in which you invested quite some time and some thinking, given the sensitivity of the topic and the strong emotions that it can evoke. Eduardo, please.
Thank you, Marie. Yes, it's true. Today I will highlight some questions for surveys that has, for example, the survey with discrimination that have some sensitive subjects like violence, sexuality, discrimination, or harassment. So when we were preparing the training with the interviews, we noticed that some of the questions that was on the questionnaire had some kind of emotional impacts. So when we saw that, we decided to do face-to-face training during the training. Okay, so in our training we include some simulations between the interviewers to try to face the challenge scenarios that they could face in the field. So, and in the end, we managed to see that this kind of exercise was essential to develop technical skills and also emotional skills, and to prepare them to be ready when they face these questions on the field. Also, what we noticed during the data collection was that also the interviewers, they was in some items feeling uncomfortable themselves, especially when they was asking in the social demographic items about the questions of sexuality or sexual identification. This is kind of understandable in our social context, especially in rural areas or with old population. Even if we start this questionnaire, this inquest, going to population from 15 to plus, but in the results, if you will not see it, but okay, the results we found that most of the interviews were women's, and most of them there was people that are adults, and we had a great component from rural areas. So This is also something that it's natural to happen. And when the interviewers was asking about these questions about sexuality and sexual identification, they was also feeling not so comfortable. So what we believe after this feedback is that in the trainings we should at least have these three components: an ethical and emotional awareness for interviewers to be prepared to recognize signs of discomfort and how they are when they are go to the field. We feel also that we should have more practical trainings and more simulations during the preparation for the field. And also what we feel is also that we have to find more space to have self-reflection dialogue during the preparation for the field. So for our point of view, if we incorporate these elements in the trainings, we will have more prepared interviewers, and in the end, I think we can ensure that we'll have better quality of the data, and also we will have more accurate and sensitive interviewers to go to the field. Okay, so moving forward, because also the time is not in our friend today, what we recommend is to build an open dialogue during the training, because interviews has to have a space to raise their concerns, and also this space should be a space for us to build strategies together. Okay, so in short, we think that if we work on these sensitive topics during the training, we are both protecting the respondents and also interviewers. Okay, thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Eduardo. And these recommendations will be taken on board for the implementation manual that we are developing to support the implementation of the questionnaire. So I will now pass it over to my colleague Fatma from UNDP as well, who will give you a flavor of the sort of high-level findings that we have extracted from the countries that have been able to share their data so far. So Fatma, please.
Thank you, Marie, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening for those joining from the other side of the world as well. Yes, my name is Fatma, and I'm part of the Global Policy Center, UNDP Global Policy Center for Governance, and we've been supporting this work on discrimination and participation as well. Okay, so I'm going to be presenting the high-level findings from the pilots that have been already concluded and what we see as part of that data. But before we really draw your attention to these findings, I want you to keep two things in mind. First, that of course, some of these results are not based on nationally representative samples, right? Some of these are just pilots, and other results are based on nationally representative samples. Hence, these prevalence estimates are not really comparable, and that's why we don't report numbers when we present these findings. So we don't focus too much on over-interpretation of these numbers. I also want you to keep in mind something that due to the low number of respondents for some follow-up questions, some conclusions that we draw from the samples are heavily, of course, based on interviewers' feedback. And that is totally fine, of course. These are the insights we would like to collect during the pilots. And this is, for example, all the insights that Eduardo just shared on the interviewers and how they felt while conducting the interviews. This is something we can't really quantify through the data. Okay, so let's start a little bit with the first finding, which is what does the data tell us about perceptions and reality, and do these things, these two concepts align? On the one hand, we first ask respondents to tell us what what do they think, or based on each ground of discrimination, which do they think is the most prevalent form of discrimination in their country? And what we see from the results is that people think socioeconomic status, ethnicity, color, or language, or sex are the most prevalent forms or grounds of discrimination. We also see that in some countries, age also comes up as a very high, frequently reported form of discrimination. Now, when we look at the results of the personal experience of people after we ask perception questions, what we also see that the perceptions we see in the data align with the perceptions, or with the experiences of people. The most frequently experienced form of discrimination that we see in the data are socioeconomic status, ethnicity, color, or language, and sex as well. And in some countries, we've also seen geographical location coming up as quite high. And our colleague from Belize mentioned political opinions because of the timing they had conducted the data. But these are really emerging, these findings really emerge from all the pilots we have seen so far. What we see in terms of what is the reality of discrimination, moving along and forgetting about perceptions, we see that women are more likely to experience discrimination throughout. Discrimination is more prevalent in the urban areas, but we also see that some countries, rural areas, experience higher prevalence of discrimination, which shows the diversity, of course, of discrimination and how people experience it in different countries. We also see a correlation between education and discrimination, where low educated individuals experience a higher level of discrimination. And this is also very much linked to socioeconomic status. It is striking that more than 70% of people that experience discrimination, they experience it more than once. Which it shows it is a repeated victimization for them. Most frequently, it happens in public spaces, public transport, public streets, so in the civic spaces. But what is also very striking is, of course, that it happens at home, where it's supposed to be the safest place for all of us. And it also very frequently happens at work. And these results are mirrored in all the pilots we've seen. And then there is the other striking results. Then less than 20% of actually those that experience discrimination reported. And then the question is, but why? Well, because people really think that nothing would happen or change by reporting the incident. And this is quite telling, of course. Some actually think that it just happens all the time and is not serious enough. Whereas what is also very prevalent is that people don't even know it is a crime. Now, apart from discrimination, we also have questions that focus and zoom in a little bit on harassment. Harassment, of course, here, I must underline harassment based on prohibited grounds, meaning you experience harassment because of how you look, where you come from, what are your beliefs, or other personal characteristics. Other forms of harassment should be excluded from this, and we have a small discussion later on the issue. What we see from the data is that the most common form of harassment is offensive comments that people receive, such as they're being insulted or they're being called names, and offensive gestures. People are stared at inappropriately, or somebody is making quite offensive gestures at you. Just to test the consistency of the results and the pilot, where we see that harassment, of course, it's always lower than discrimination, which is fine because the harassment concept is also included in the main discrimination question. What is very telling and important as finding is that big part of the harassment actually that the people experience based on these prohibited grounds is of sexual nature. And especially this happens through emails, texts, social media in general. So there's this cyberbullying, but of sexual nature disproportionately. As it is the case with discrimination, very few people report experiences of harassment. And again, it's the same reasons they give. They are afraid how they'll be treated. They didn't even know this is a crime, or they don't trust the system would do anything about it, even if they report. However, here we also see something interesting, which we didn't see with the discrimination reporting, is that people worry that there will be negative consequences for them if they report the harassment. With this, I'm going to pass the floor to Marie to take us through overarching key issues we have identified. Marie.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Fatma. Let us go straight. We have 6 issues that we wanted to discuss, and I think I'm going to go straight to the first one without reviewing the 6 of them. So these are, specific technical issues that we wanted to bring to your attention. And the first one is on the importance of the socio-demographic variables in the first section. If we want to measure intersectional discrimination and if we want to present the results in a comprehensive way. And what we note in the reports that have come, in the tables that have been developed, is some level of confusion between the discrimination, how we measure discrimination based on specific grounds, where you can say 20% of the population experienced discrimination on the basis of ethnicity, for example, versus, or as compared with, discrimination experienced by people who belong to the corresponding groups for these specific grounds. So, for example, the percentage of ethnic minorities who experience discrimination. So often, more than once, we've seen, NSOs reporting that 20%, for example, of ethnic minorities have experienced discrimination, while actually the question we have and the data we collected is only telling us that 20% of the population has experienced discrimination on the basis of ethnicity. So these are 2 different realities. And if we go to the next slide, I want to show that if you want to say anything about the experience of discrimination by ethnic minorities in the country, you need a strong sociodemographic section where you collect information about the ethnic origin of your respondents. And there you may find out, if you look at the lady in red, that indeed some ethnic minorities experience discrimination only because of their ethnicity. But you will also be able to find that some ethnic minorities feel discriminated against because of their ethnicity and their socioeconomic status, which brings us to the concept of intersectional discrimination. And then you may find also that some ethnic minorities actually do not report discrimination based on ethnicity, but rather because of other grounds, sexual orientation, religion, so on and so forth. So to paint a picture of discrimination experienced by a specific group, you need the sociodemographic variables, and you cannot rely only on the grounds of discrimination that are listed in the question on experience. So that's a very important point, which we will have to elaborate a little bit more in the implementation manual. The second point, if we go to the next slide, is related to the first question on perception. Fatma gave you the high-level results. So we ask, how frequently do you think that discrimination based on, and then we list 5 grounds, happen in your country? And here, I wanted to show that a person may not perceive discrimination to be frequent, but this doesn't mean that this person is not worried about experiencing discrimination in her life. So a bit later in the process, we decided to test a second question, which you see on the right-hand side here, which asks, how much do you worry about experiencing discrimination or harassment in your day-to-day life? And what we see in the case of Mozambique is that the level of worry or the fear of experiencing discrimination is at 48% for those who worried a lot and quite a lot. Whereas the figures on the general awareness of discrimination, so how frequently do you think it happens, are much lower. So from this example, we can see that, in fact, it may be important to also measure the level of worry, if only to also to remind ourselves that fear and worry affects your behavior. You may not go to certain places. You may avoid certain interactions because of your worry. It will affect your quality of life, your stress, your mental health. So if we don't have that side of the picture, we may be missing something. And I will pass it to Fatma for the following point.
Thank you, Marie. I think up until now, we mentioned discrimination many times, right? But now, of course, one of the big questions here is, how do we create a concept, a definition of discrimination that would be understood by the respondents? How do we collect data in a way that we're going to really have questions that encapsulate the entire concept of discrimination and harassment? So the first challenge that we saw when we were piloting this survey instrument is really with the definition that we give to respondents, the concept itself of what discrimination should include. And I see that there is a comment from a colleague that is mentioning how we define discrimination and harassment. Are they provided, or in particular harassment is more accurately measured through acts, if we provide acts of harassment. So please, if you have any comments or if you have any observations on this concept from your own personal experience, do share them in the comments. This is really an important concept. Now, going back to this survey instrument, this question on the prevalence of discrimination, of course, is aligned with the SDG indicator, and that was mentioned very much in the beginning. So when we measure this concept, we ask about experiences of discrimination and harassment in one question. So we're trying to capture those two things in one core question. And we're going to talk a little bit about what could be the issues that arise from this and what we've seen from the pilot. But just bear with us for a second that we can all be on the same page and see how we define discrimination for the respondents. So in the questionnaire, we tell respondents that discrimination happens when they're treated unfairly or harassed because of the way they look, where they come from, what they believe in, or for other reasons. They may be refused equal access to work, housing, healthcare, education, marriage, or family life, the police or justice system, shops, restaurants, or other services opportunities. They may also encounter comments, gestures, or other behaviors that make them feel offended, threatened, or insulted, or you may have to stay away from places or activities to avoid such behaviors. This is the definition we give to respondents, and then we proceed to ask for each ground of discrimination if people have experienced this, if people had such experiences in the past 5 years and the past 12 months. Now, what are the challenges we've identified three main challenges. First, we see that the concept perhaps is not clear enough among the respondents, and especially with those with low level of education. We can work a little bit more to provide a clear and more easy to understand language and work with examples rather than give this long definition. And what we also see from emerging from this, and we're going to discuss a little bit later, is that we know discrimination and harassment based on prohibited grounds should be captured in this one question. But harassment is not explicitly defined. We define what discrimination is. Discrimination happens when, but we never make reference to harassment happens when. So what are the implications of that? We're going to discuss in a second. But first, I would like to invite the colleagues from Peru to share their experience about the concept and how did the respondents react when they had to report experiences of discrimination. Arturo, our colleagues?
Okay. Well, for us in Peru, the use of simple language and provide concrete examples so that people with a low level of education can understand the concepts of discrimination and harassment. There is a key point, the importance of using simple language and concrete examples to understand the concepts of discrimination and harassment, as we have observed that a lack of understanding of the concept of discrimination can strongly influence how people, essentially those with low education levels, respond. In the Peruvian context, people with low educational levels may face greater difficulties in understanding the questionnaires, especially when the questions are formulated in abstract terms. There is a direct relationship between educational level and the ability to understand complex concepts, such as those related to discrimination or violence. It is therefore recommended to improve the formulation of concepts, using clear and more accessible language and reducing the number of examples to facilitate understanding. However, understanding does not depend solely on the level of education. Other factors also have an influence, such as the cultural group to which one belongs, the macho attitudes and behaviors rooted in our country that allows the normalization of discriminatory situations. In surveys such as ENARES and ENDES conducted by INEI Peru, it has been observed that the prevalence of sensitive issues such as violence is higher among people with a low level of education or secondary education. This result may reflect two overlapping realities. On the one hand, a possible underestimation of discrimination due to a limited understanding or its normalization within the social environment. And on the other hand, a greater exposure of these groups to situations of exclusion and structural marginalization. Although they do not always recognize them as such. Include contextualized examples in the formulation of the questions. This would help to improve the validity of responses and more accurately capture the experience of discrimination, essentially in groups with low educational attainment. This underscores the need for the questions in the questionnaires to be clear, simple, and appropriate to the context. It is also essential that interviewers are trained to explain what discrimination is, using simple language and concrete examples adapted to the reality of each population. This improves the possibility that all respondents, not only those with higher levels of education, will be able to identify and adequately report their experiences. This is key to producing more inclusive and reliable data on discrimination.
Thank you very much for the very useful insights. Yes, we heard them from you. Contextualization is extremely important. Provide examples so everyone can really understand these concepts of discrimination. But the training of interviewers is equally important, and going back, reiterating from all the previous speakers that mentioned training of interviewers, not only to detect sentiment or feelings from the respondents, but to really master the concepts of discrimination to be able to explain it. And then the normalization is something, a very interesting point you mentioned here, that it's so normalized, especially among low educated individuals, although they have the highest prevalence. And we see in the reporting that when people mention they don't want to report discrimination, basically they also mention, I didn't even know it was a crime, as one reason. But now I would like to invite Palesa from Lesotho, who can share an example, her experience in implementing this survey and how they incorporated and defined the concept of discrimination in their survey to help solve some of these issues. Palesa?
Yes, Fatima, thank you so much. As you have stated, my name is Palesa. I'm from the National Statistics Office, Lesotho. So we have undertaken the Access to Justice Needs survey, which includes the module on discrimination and harassment. We have not analyzed the results as yet, as we were conducting the survey very soon, but we have cleaned the data and we have cross-tabulated the data. So what I can say from the experience is discrimination. In fact, the governance and peace security is a very sensitive and emotional study, which needs the intensive training for the enumerators, so to be able to understand the concepts clearly, so to be able to explain or understand if the respondents do not give the correct responses. Because if the enumerators do not understand the concepts very clearly, it becomes difficult for them even to realize when the respondents give them the correct, the wrong responses. So on the discrimination part, what we have realized is we should use the simple language as simple as possible. I can just describe it as maybe we can just use a spoken language than the written language, because most people they understand it when you explain to them. So on this module on discrimination, we didn't undertake the latest one that we have developed, but we have used the SDG 16 indicator initiative, but it went well. However, for what I can say is on the description part, like you have just mentioned previously, we should be more elaborative as much as we can when describe what discrimination or harassment mean to the respondents or to the enumerators. For example, in our case here in Lesotho, we explained it as you have shown in our slide, Fatma. But on top of that, we also added by explaining through the examples of the direct discrimination, as well as the examples of the indirect ones. We even went further to explain the direct to the respondents that direct discrimination happens when a person is treated differently because of the way they are. It happens if someone does not get a job because of this disability or sex, for example, On the other side, we further explained to them that discrimination can happen in two ways. It can be direct or indirect. The indirect one, it's when something is happening to you indirectly. For instance, it happens when something applies to everyone in the same way but affects some people unfairly. For example, we made an example in the questionnaire that you have explained that the example of the indirect, if there's a school in your area and then every children in the school has to climb up a flight of stairs to get an extra classes. So this would be discriminating against children who could not be able to do that, to climb the stairs. Maybe they have some kind of disability or some sort of. So I think with that clear examples of the direct and indirect can easy the process of people to understand what we mean by discrimination. So that helps us to be able to understand, even when the respondents were giving us the wrong responses, we were just able to relate to the direct or the indirect by asking them, how do you classify this discrimination in between the indirect and the direct that I've just explained to you? Which one, the ones that we are mentioning, which one can it fall under? And then if the respondent is realizing that, oh, this one is not falling under each one of the examples that she has mentioned, then the respondent will be able to say, no, this is not a discrimination of, or it is a discrimination. I think on that note, that is the brief or the short experience that I can share with you for now. Until we have analyzed the results, then maybe we can give you more on what we have found on the findings. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Palesa, for this very insightful, of course, intervention here. You again reiterated the importance of the training of the enumerators and really providing examples, having more clear definitions for respondents and using a simple language for them to understand what we're trying to get here as experiences. But you also raised an interesting point on the direct and indirect discrimination, and that you make a very clear distinction and definition in the questionnaire when you collect the data. And these are all points that we're taking on board when we're going to meet in Oslo, as it was mentioned, in about 2 weeks' time, where we're going to be discussing this survey instrument and taking on board all the comments also we received today. So please post in the chat if you have any suggestions or experience in this area of work. Okay, now continuing a little bit on this, the conceptual issue of harassment and discrimination, and I see in the chat that there has been already some engagement, and Fra has shared some results from their cognitive testing. Basically, we want to come back very briefly on the issue of discrimination and harassment, and that, of course, this module, this question measures these two concepts. So if a person has been discriminated or harassed on these prohibited grounds. And what we basically see in this, in the pilot, is that maybe the question needs a little bit of better refinement. And of course, this refers back to the issue that we define what discrimination is, but we don't really define what harassment is as part of this, this one question that is also, I must repeat, aligned with the SDG indicator 16.1b. And what we also see from the pilot is that the standalone questions on harassment, the optional part in the questionnaire on harassment, needs also a little bit of a refinement in order to capture only harassment that is based on these prohibited grounds, such as how people look or their beliefs and so on and so forth, and to exclude experiences of discrimination that go beyond this. And what the pilot tells us is, and some of the interviewers from what we've seen from the pilot, is that when we ask these questions, some respondents respond with harassment experiences that go beyond what we are trying to measure with this question. So this is really the takeaway. I invite you to look at the file that we have shared with you. There you can see in detail what are the issues. In the interest of time, unfortunately, we won't be able to spend more time on this, but the questionnaire is already given to you together with the file. Finally, very briefly, just to mention it, and it's an issue that I'm sure if you have attended this meeting, you know it has been previously discussed, is the telescoping effects, how the question or the methodology is designed is that we first ask whether a person has experienced these forms of discrimination in the past 5 years, and then we ask for the past 12 months in order for the respondent to place these events correctly in time. This, what we refer to, is a telescoping effect, the temporal displacement of an event for the respondent. It could be forward and backward telescoping. And again, we don't really have time today to go into this. You can refer to the files for a little bit more details. But what we know is that research has shown the omission of the screener questions, which is the 5 years in our questionnaire, that experiences, so if you keep only the 12-month period, experiences of discrimination, violence, significantly higher than if you don't ask this question. So people really have struggled in recalling these events and placing them correctly in time. Now, the challenge we've seen is that there is some hesitation by the NSOs to include both questions because respondents are also a little bit confused of why are you asking me two questions that are practically the same. And the actions we will need to take, of course, is we need a better training for the enumerators, that they really understand the concept and the rationale behind this. And we also need a simple explanation for the respondents so it doesn't cause confusion and, of course, helps them recall better and achieve better data accuracy. Marie, I pass the floor to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Fatma. And I will skip this point because we're coming close to the end. I'm going to invite Peru to tell us about this last point, which was a reflection on the answer categories that we had for the question on why did you not report the incident? For those who say, no, I did not report it. And Peru will highlight one answer item that we had missed and will comment on a few others. Please.
Well, a second relevant aspect is related to the reasons why people do not respond to situations of discrimination or violence, which contributes to the underreporting of cases. This underreporting may be due both to limitations in the response options of the questionnaires and to structural and cultural factors that inhibit reporting. Based on our experience with surveys such as the ENDES and ENARES in Peru, two fundamental pillars that explain this underreporting can be highlighted: fear or reprisals, stigma or the aggressor, and distrust of the authorities. One of the recurrent findings in the absence of an explicit category that captures the feeling of shame. For example, an option such as I embarrassed, I feel ashamed is not always clearly included, despite being a frequent motive in testimonies collected in qualitative studies. Likewise, it is necessary to disaggregate the fear of reprisals, differentiating between situations such as fear of reprisals from my spouse, from a family member, or from the work or social environment. Finally, it is important to consider that some categories used in international surveys, such as problems with papers, resident permit, language difficulties, or not wanting to go to court, may not be relevant in the Peruvian context. Therefore, it is recommended that the response options be carefully adapted to the local sociocultural environment, prioritizing relevant variables such as educational level, family context, and the dominant belief system, including machismo, which influences the normalization and silencing of violence and discrimination. Thank you.
Excellent. And thank you very much to the Peruvian team for really giving us a rich picture of the undercurrent and the factors fueling these discriminatory behavior and the lack of reporting. We will now turn to our last speaker, who is Fiona Willis Nunes from the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And Fiona will brief us on the latest iteration of the administrative data guidance that's being developed by this task team. So Fiona, you have a few minutes. Please give us a sense of where this is going. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marie. Can you confirm that you can see my slides and that you're seeing the correct setup of them? Wonderful. Good. Okay, I'm going to give you a high-speed review of where we stand with this guidance. Those of you who were in the full Praia group members meeting recently, I apologize for the repetition, or indeed those of you who were in the EU equality subgroup a few weeks ago. But I do think it's important that as many people as possible hear about what's going on with this piece of work. So as you might know, I've joined the team only in the last few months, and this piece of work on producing the guide on administrative data for non-discrimination and equality long predates me here. Most of you have been involved in some way or other in producing it. So I want to start out by thanking all of those of you who have either provided content for it or provided your comprehensive comments on the previous 2 rounds of consultation that have gone on in this piece of work. The task I have been given is to kind of give it a final review and a little bit of a streamlining. That's what I'm trying to do. We are being careful to not make this document turn into a comprehensive guide on using administrative data for statistics, nor a comprehensive guide on statistics on non-discrimination and equality, because both of those 2 things are well covered elsewhere. So what I'm actually doing is sort of paring down the great draft that we already have and trying to get to really the essence of it. So I'm dividing it into 3 main chunks. And it's those 3 main chunks that I'm just going to quickly run through now. Except that there's boxes over my screen, so I can't see my own slides. There we go. Okay, so the first part is a sort of an overall introduction. What are we doing, why, and how? One little tweak that might sound small and semantic, but is actually, I think, important, is that we are putting into the title that this is a guide intended for national statistical offices, because there are plenty of people who could benefit from different types of guidance or information, and we cannot be all things to all people and all audiences. So we're trying to make sure that we're focusing it on the particular audience, which is the National Statistical Office. That's not to say that nobody else can read it, nobody else will benefit from it. Of course they will, but that is really the crux of who we're aiming this at. This initial chapter is going to give some very brief definitions of concepts. So what we really mean by administrative data, and we are taking quite a broad view of it here. So not simply administrative data in the sense of government data, but we're taking into account things like the latest work on citizen-generated data and the role of CSOs and civil society in producing and holding data. We're going to look just very, very briefly in this introductory chapter at what the drivers are for the increasing move towards use of administrative data. And as we've just heard in the earlier discussions, we're going to make sure that we've got our concepts clear about what is meant by discrimination, how we distinguish between direct and indirect discrimination, the different kinds of indicators that we might be looking at, and of course, the difference between measuring discrimination and measuring inequality. We're going to look just a little bit again in this sort of introductory sense at what things are either unique or particularly pertinent to this topic. So not things that matter to all use of administrative data for producing statistics, but specific to this topic. For example, questions around inclusion, so administrative data that might have coverage limitations, questions about identification, the challenges when it comes to self-identification of grounds of discrimination, the importance of data access and partnerships with those who hold data sources, especially when those data sources are not held by governmental bodies, and the particular importance of data linkage when we're talking about data sources that either by omission or design might not cover all of the population of interest. So that's the first chapter. The second chapter, I have to just move my Zoom so that I can actually see my own text. There we go. The second chapter is really the meat of the revised outline. So this is where we're actually looking at indicators and sources. The sort of take-home message of this chapter really is, look, you can already do quite a lot without actually having to go out and get any new data sources or do anything particularly different. Look at all the things you can already measure that have to do with measuring discrimination, measuring equality. I want to just emphasize one point here, which has been given to us by several different commenters during the last round of consultation. We're talking about non-discrimination and equality, but in practice, what we actually measure is discrimination and inequality. Just to kind of clarify the use of language there. But as I go on, I will talk about non-discrimination and equality. So this chapter is going to have a look at the indicators, starting with the quote marks easy ones. So what can we already do? What could already be produced using data sources that are in general readily available and don't need an awful lot of work? And what can be determined about non-discrimination and equality based on those? Then we'll look a little bit more at the ones which need perhaps more work. So some of the sources that already exist but have significant limitations. And we'll go into quite some detail on the gaps and the limitations and the data quality concerns, and of course the solutions, because that's the point of having this guide. And this is where we're going to see all of the great examples that many of you have already provided. And as I've mentioned in previous presentations before, I am reworking those examples, and I will come to that in a moment. Okay, and then finally, we're going to get to the recommendations. And again, there's an awful lot of things that can be recommended, but they don't necessarily all have a specific relevance to this topic, non-discrimination and equality and admin sources. So I'm not going to repeat all the recommendations about best practices in using administrative data. And I'm not going to repeat all the recommendations about producing statistics on non-discrimination and equality. I'm going to point the reader to those existing sources. And we already have, as you will have seen in previous drafts, a very extensive reference list. So we will keep that in the document. But here we're honing it down to some of the really important take-home messages for this topic, such as the importance of mapping data sources, identifying what already exists, and seeing what kind of indicators can be produced using those. The really, really crucial one, the importance of strong partnerships. And particularly if you build those strong partnerships, you might even be able to influence how suppliers or data holders actually collect data that might be useful to you as an NSO. And there's going to be just a little bit in here about analyzing and presenting data. Again, it's not going to be a whole piece about data visualization and dissemination, but it is going to be about the importance of, listen, if you collect data that is disaggregated at a high level of disaggregation to permit analysis of discrimination, then publish it. And here are some recommendations on how to do that. So that is my whistle-stop tour. And then I want to just put up this slide, which many of you have already seen, but I want you all to see it one more time. If you've already provided examples, if we already have national or regional examples from you and from your organization, I'm going to be contacting you if I haven't already, just to make sure that we've accurately reflected what you do and that we've really got the take-home message. So instead of just necessarily describing your project or your study, we want to say what in there might be useful to others. And if you haven't already provided examples, or indeed even if you have, I am still looking for some additional ones on these 4 bullet points here, to try and help illustrate some of the really important take-home messages. So one of those is about the systematic mapping of relevant sources. Another is about this forming effective partnerships with the holders of administrative data sources. And related to that, I'm really eager to find examples of successful attempts to influence the holders of administrative data so that they make some kind of positive change, in the sense of a change that helps the NSO gather data that might be useful for non-discrimination and equality statistics. And then finally, using sources that fall outside of what is typically understood by the term administrative sources, especially data sources from civil society. Thank you very much. Back to you, Marie.
Yeah, brilliant. And thank you so much. In fact, if we can keep that last slide on, that will be helpful. We have a minute, so we would invite any of you to please share or comment on anything that Fiona will have presented. I mean, this is fairly groundbreaking, I think, Fiona, right? To compile these experiences into one place and to articulate some recommendations has on specifically the use of administrative data. We haven't come across a resource as yet that does that. So it's going to be a major contribution from the Praia group. And your last point also calls our attention to the very high potential in using administrative data that are produced by non-governmental organizations, which is also pushing the boundaries a little bit more. So, and if nobody has any comment or experience to share here, I think
yes.
Yes, please. I can't see the hands.
Hi,
Please go
Fiona.
ahead.
I have a question. What about the social media? We platform some example about the discrimination at the workplace from social media, from chats and posts in Facebook. Do you consider it as a source?
Do you know, Yafit, I actually haven't got any examples of that. And I think that the intention of this piece of work, aside from the definition, let's not talk about the definition of administrative data. I think the intent of this piece of work is to have something where we're talking about non-conventional, non-survey sources. So if there are good examples, if you have an example that you could share, I would love to hear it, because if it doesn't fit into our definition of administrative data, then let's say something different, right? Because we want to just say what sources can provide us with valuable information to use for statistics on non-discrimination and equality.
Okay, great.
So I look
think
forward to
that-
hearing from you, Yafit, and nice to see you because I haven't seen you
Nice
in a
to
long
see you
time.
too. Okay.
Great. We are running out of time, but please, colleagues, you've received a link to the Spark Blue space where you are more than welcome to continue to comment and input on these issues. We have also posted there the document that we shared with you and that we will continue updating. So we look forward to continuing the discussions there, and I will now call on our colleagues in Peru to close this meeting.
Dear colleagues, thank you all for your active participation. Your contributions are very important to help us finalize a survey model and guidance on the use of administrative data that is both practical and impactful. As we look ahead to the meeting in Oslo, and as you continue to review the document that has been shared with you, please feel free to write to the Praia Group Secretariat to share further feedback and suggestions. We deeply appreciate your continued dedication to this work. Safe travels to those joining us in Oslo, and thank you once again to all for your commitment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Have a
very
good
much.
day, everyone, or good evening.
Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.